up saying me.
Oh,
Are
two
you
o'clock.
are
Oh,
you still having it?
that should be 3 o'clock.
Are you still having it?
It should be 3 o'clock. The
Okay,
meeting is moved
I'll
to
send a
3.
correction.
Oh, thank you. Check with
Are you,
Rosalie.
are you still having it?
Yes, I do, but 3 o'clock. Oh,
CC2?
2B.
Oh, 2B. Thank you so much. Give me a sec. I'll be
Thank
right back.
you. Mhm.
It looks like we just have two attendees. Okay, so it's 1 o'clock. I can first start with some housekeeping remarks. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks for participating in our remote bidders conference for our brake and tire wear RFP. We'll do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation. There are two formats for participation: the Zoom web app as well as teleconference. Before we begin, I want to review some guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. Please silence your other communication devices, such as your cell or desk phone, or Teams notifications like on my computer. This will ensure that we're not hearing any feedback or causing interruption during the meeting. All participants on Zoom, except for South Coast AQMD staff, will be placed on mute by the host. You'll not be able to mute or unmute your line manually. For those people who are on Zoom, if you'd like to make public comments or ask a question on the Zoom screen, please click on the raise hand button. You may also use the Q&A button on Zoom to ask questions in writing. For those who are calling in by phone, you can dial *9 to signal that you'd like to comment. Your name or part of your phone number will be called when it's your turn to comment, and the host will unmute your line automatically. Please note you can hang up and or leave the Zoom meeting at any time. Please treat others with courtesy, civility, and respect. Failure to do so can result in your mic being muted or you being dropped from the meeting. Lastly, please be aware that this video conference meeting is being recorded. By participating in this meeting hosted by South Coast AQMD, you agree to authorize recording of audio and visual content presented during the live event and consent to subsequent use of the recording in the public domain by South Coast AQMD. Okay, so that is the housekeeping remarks. Now we can move on to agenda item 1, which is a welcome. So my name is Scott Epstein. I am a planning and rules manager at South Coast AQMD. Just as a quick review, so we opened up this RFP on February 2nd for a research study for funding up to $850,000 to study the concentrations of brake and tire wear throughout our jurisdiction. This is our first bidders conference out of 2 total bidders conferences. Attendance at just one of them is required to be eligible to submit a proposal. It's the same presentation for both bidders conferences. So we want to make sure that all bidders have access to all the questions that prospective bidders may ask and all the staff responses that are asked at both bidders conferences and via email. So what we're going to do is after this meeting, we'll summarize questions and answers during the meeting on our MATE6 website, aqmd.gov/MATE6. We'll also put on there any email questions about the RFP and our responses, so kind of everybody can build their proposals from the same set of information. And okay, so that's item 1. So now we're going to move on to item number 2. So I want to introduce Dr. Nico Schulte, who's an air quality specialist. We'll begin the presentation, and then Dr. Mohammed Solwat, who's a program supervisor, will speak on a section on the monitoring, and Dr. Sangmi Lee, who's a planning and rules manager, will then speak on the modeling side of things. Take it away, Nico.
Thank you, Scott. Good afternoon, everybody. Next slide, please. So this is the outline for the presentation today. So I'll go over the objectives of the work for this RFP, the tasks specified in the RFP. Mohammed is going to go over the capabilities of the monitoring group and the work that they plan to conduct for MATE6. Sangmi Lee will go over capabilities for modeling work and the work that they will conduct for MATE6 in parallel with the study for this RFP. And then I'll go over some details of the proposal submission procedures. And finally, we'll open it up for discussion. And we encourage everyone to please ask questions about the planned work that South Coast AQMD will conduct in parallel with this study. Next slide. So these are the objectives of the work for this RFP. The primary objective is to estimate brake wear particle and tire and road wear particle exposure concentrations throughout the South Coast Air Basin and the Coachella Valley. So AQMD staff will use those exposure estimates developed through the study for this RFP to estimate the health risks that are associated with the brake wear particle and tire and road wear particles. And the monitoring, the modeling, and the analysis work for this study will be performed in coordination with the Multiple Air Toxics Exposure 6 study. So, I mean, I'm sure everyone's aware, but just as a refresher, so MATE6 is a study for relying on measurements and modeling of air toxics exposures and the associated health risks. And it follows up on previous air toxic studies by South Coast AQMD. Next slide, please. So this is a timeline of the tasks specified in the RFP. So task 1 is to present the proposed study design to the MATE6 Technical Advisory Group within 2 months after contract signing. Task 2 is a literature review to identify the pollutants or substances in brake wear particles and tire and road wear particles within 6 months after signing. Task 3 is to develop a method to estimate the exposures to brake wear particles and tire and road wear particles, also within 6 months after signing. Task 4 is the actual measurement, modeling, and analysis work, and to develop the exposure estimates for MATE6 for both brake wear particles and tire and road wear particles within 30 months after signing. And so this task will be conducted in coordination with the measurements, modeling, and analysis that South Coast AQMD will conduct for MATE6. Task 5 is to transfer the data and to provide the draft final report. 39 months after signing. And task 6 is a presentation to staff, a technical report, and study publication. So the technical report will be included in the MATES 6 final report. And there's presentations may also include presentations to the governing board or committees or to the MATES technical advisory group. This is due 42 months after signing. The anticipated contract execution is August 16th, although this may change depending on the timeline. Next slide. So we wanted to highlight a few details of these tasks. So the exposure estimates developed in this study must quantify both the directly emitted and the resuspended, or the combination of the two, PM10, breakwear particle, and tire and roadwear particle mass concentrations. These exposure estimates must specifically identify exposures due to emissions originating from on-road vehicles and roadways. So exposure estimates developed in this study must identify those exposures due to those sources, on-road vehicles and roadways specifically. Additionally, the exposure estimates must at a minimum quantify the substances that are identified in the task 2 literature review that also have associated cancer potency factors or reference exposure levels identified by the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment for California, or OEHA. And additionally, those exposure estimates should not rely only on model calculations, because the emission estimates used for those model calculations may have large uncertainties. So measurements to support those exposure estimates are required. Next slide. The exposure estimates developed in this study must have a spatial resolution of approximately 2 kilometers or finer. So we anticipate that to achieve this resolution and coverage over the entire South Coast Air Basin and the Coachella Valley will require both measurements and modeling. So for modeling work for this study, it's desirable that the contractor uses a modeling system that's similar to that system that South Coast AQMD staff plan to use for MATES 6. And Sang-Mi can provide more details about that modeling system. Or the contractor may collaborate with South Coast AQMD staff. Since AQMD will be conducting some modeling work in parallel with this study, there may be some collaboration where AQMD staff may be able to conduct some of the modeling related activities to support this study as well. For the modeling work, any emissions data or input data that the contractor develops, that data should be provided to South Coast AQMD staff so that AQMD staff can use it independently for independent modeling work. And that emissions data should be ready to use within the AQMD modeling platform. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mohammed Salat to go over the monitoring capabilities.
Thank you very much, Nico, and good afternoon, everyone. As Nico mentioned, I'll be going over the monitoring capabilities that we plan to use as part of the MATES 6 study. Next slide, please. So starting off with time-integrated particulate measurements, as you can see on this slide, we plan to collect filter samples for 3 different size fractions. That includes PM2.5, PM10, and TSP. For PM2.5, we plan to collect filter samples at 6 sites, and we plan to have them analyzed for PM mass, elemental and organic carbon, ions, as well as metals. For PM10, samples will be collected at all 10 sites, and the filter samples will be analyzed for the same components as PM2.5. And in addition to that, we are going to analyze levoglucosan in PM10 samples as well. And lastly, for TSP, filter samples will be collected at 2 sites and will be analyzed for metals as well as hexavalent chromium. Next slide, please. Moving on to the time-integrated gaseous and semi-volatile measurements. For all of these analyses, as you can see, we're going to collect samples at all 10 sites. And we are going to analyze the samples for VOCs, including ethylene oxide, carbonyls, as well as PAHs. Next slide, please. Okay, and with regard to the continuous measurements, we are going to measure continuously the PM mass concentration, black carbon, ultrafine PM, metals, organic carbon, ammonia, and ethylene oxide. For some of these pollutants, such as black carbon and ultrafine PM, measurements will be conducted at all 10 sites, but for some other pollutants, we are going to be doing the measurements at a more limited number of sites. For example, for metals, we are going to do continuous metals measurements at 5 sites, and 3 sites for ammonia measurements, and 2 sites for organic carbon, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. And as the last slide, I wanted to talk a little about the potential resources that we can share. First off, we would be able to share the data from continuous measurements and time-integrated measurements that we are doing to support the work. Of course, data has to go through the QA/QC process before we can share the data. Another potential resource that could be shared is the filters from non-destructive analyses. One example that I can give is the Teflon filters that we are going to collect for the metals analysis for PM2.5 samples. These filters could be potentially used for further analysis if needed. In addition to that, there might be limited space, power, and sampling resources available at some of the stations if additional sample collection or monitoring is needed. But I wanted to emphasize that this has to be evaluated and discussed in a case-by-case basis. We need to find out more about the objectives and the outcomes, if any, additional analysis is needed. And lastly, I wanted to mention that limited laboratory resources for additional chemical analysis might also be available. One example that I can give is that, for example, based on the feedback that we received from the TAG members, excuse me, we are looking into adding, for example, analyzing for lithium as part of the metals analysis. So we can have a little bit of discussion about that as well. And yeah, that's all that I wanted to share today. And with that, I'll pass it on to Sangmi.
Thank you. Next slide. So this section is modeling and emissions inventory information. Next slide, please. So this is summarized the modeling platform we use for the SIP modeling or MATES modeling or any other special study modeling. So we typically use the CMAC, sometimes CAMAX, and then we utilize MFAC, mobile source emissions model, MEGAN for biogenic, SMOKE for allocating emissions spatially and temporally, and then WRF to generate meteorology. For SIP modeling, we typically employ 4x4 kilometer grid spacing, and then we develop various different scenarios of emissions, including year 2018, and then future years such as 2025, 2030, or even going further. So the MATES study focusing on air toxic concentrations and cancer risk estimates, we typically conduct modeling in 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer grid spacing. Previous MATES utilized ChemX with R-track tracking mechanism, but we are also considering CMAC with trace algorithm. So when we do modeling, we make sure that our modeling domain covers entire jurisdiction for this upcoming MATES. That's our plan. And we simulate entire calendar year. Next slide. So a little bit more delving into emissions capability. So as many of you would know, the total amount of emissions are usually coming from regulatory inventory. So that emission is a total amount per county typically. And since that is labeled as regulatory inventory, there are not much flexibility to change it. We typically go by regulatory inventory amount. But when it comes to allocating spatially and temporarily to modeling domain, there are quite a bit of flexibility, and then we do our best to represent real world situation. When it comes to on-road mobile sources, we utilize Caltrans PAMS data that tracking actual the traffic volumes on freeways. When it comes to heavy-duty vehicles, the information is a little bit more limited than light-duty. But then last round of modeling we conducted last year and year before, we utilize single-loop sensors. Next one. So you recall the ships have significant impact in air quality in Los Angeles Air Basin. So the similarly total ship emissions estimated for the regulatory inventory, but then also when it comes to allocating, we utilize transponder data. It's called AIS, provided marine cadastre. It has different vessel types and different operation modes. So we utilize those information to allocate in the modeling domain as shown in the lower right graph. Next one. Aircraft is another big source of the pollutants and toxic materials. So total amount of emissions are utilized or estimated using FAA's model called AEDT, Aviation Environmental Design Tool. But then once you calculate total emissions based with AEDT, we have to allocate in the modeling domain as well. For that, we use the commercial aircraft tracking data set. It's called the Aircraft Communication Addressing and Reporting System, ACARS. We utilize ACARS data to allocate aircraft emissions in three-dimensional and temporarily for the major commercial airports in the basin. CARB also developed a tool called GATE, Gridded Aircraft Trajectory Emissions, and this method is applied to smaller airports. Next one. So this is just a brief example of previous MATES modeling. So you see the first upper right one, the emission level that tracking the mobile sources very closely, major roadways and the train, railroads. And this emission information going to the CMAX, so regional concentration, that is lower left one, and then you apply the cancer risk, then you get the cancer exposure, that's upper right. And then also this tool allows us to estimate contribution of different air toxics. Also to a certain level, we also utilize these tools to separate out the contribution of certain sectors as well. So this is concluding our brief presentation for the modeling and inventory capability. Going back to Nico.
Thanks, Sang-Mi. Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides are going to cover just submission procedures. Next slides. Okay, so when developing your proposals, if your proposed work relies on support that South Coast AQMD will conduct in parallel with your proposed work for this RFP, such as using station locations or available space or power, or using some of the modeling capabilities that AQMD staff will conduct, then you must obtain a letter of support or letters of support from South Coast AQMD. So we encourage you to ask questions at the bidders conferences today or the next one on Wednesday next week. or contact myself, the project officer, to discuss the support that AQMD can provide for the proposed work. So any questions and answers will be published on the MATE-6 website at the link shown on the slide. However, all questions must be submitted by March 25th. So no questions or answers will be, published after that point. To actually request support and obtain a letter of support, please contact me before April 2nd. Next slide. This is the summary of the timeline. I've kind of gone over some of these points before. March 8th today, that's the first bidders conference. There's another one, a second bidders conference on Wednesday next week at 8 a.m. Pacific Daylight Savings Time. Last day to submit questions to myself is March 25th. Request letters of support by April 2nd. And then finally, the proposals are due on May 2nd. These are due no later than 2 p.m. Pacific Daylight Savings Time at South Coast AQMD. And then finally, we anticipate contract execution for around August 16th, although that may vary slightly. And my contact information is here on the slide. Next slide, please. Okay, some details of the submission procedures. Make sure that all the proposals are signed, electronic signatures are acceptable. You must submit hard copies of proposals. They must arrive by May 2nd, no later than 2 p.m. Pacific Daylight Savings Time at South Coast AQMD. Direct them to the address shown on the slide here. So those proposals must be submitted in a sealed envelope, including 4 hard copies of the proposal. Please mark the upper left-hand corner of the envelope with your name and address and the text shown here, the request for proposals P2024-09. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll turn it back to Dr. Scott Epstein, who's going to lead the open discussion. We encourage you all to please ask any questions.
Thanks, Nico. So this discussion is open to people that plan on submitting a proposal and also the public. We're hoping that you have questions for us about the support that we can provide. And like I said, we'll post most of the questions we're hoping to be able to answer here, but regardless, we will post the questions and answers from this meeting and anything done via email at aqmd.gov/mate6. So the floor is now open. All right, maybe we can start with Yifang Zhu.
Thank you, Scott. Can everybody hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, just a clarification question. This particular RFA is just looking for PM10 as a total, not separating the fine and coarse mode, right? Or there is expectation to separate out the PM 2.5 versus 2.5 to 10 as two separate outcomes. Versus just looking at PM10 as a one outcome for the surface exposure surface.
Yeah, let's Nico, do you want to field that one?
Yes, yeah. So we're looking for PM10 specifically. So the idea is that we need to use that for calculating cancer risk and non-cancer chronic health impacts. So yeah, we're looking at PM10 specifically. And additionally, so this includes a literature review of substances that make up those breakaway particle and tire and roadway particles. And so we're looking at quantifying like all of those substances that have OEHA identified cancer risk factor, cancer potency factors, or reference exposure levels.
Thank you.
Okay. Did that answer your question?
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, we can move to Ed Fortner.
Yeah, this is Ed. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, excellent. Glad that's working. I just sort of actually I have this is a really basic just procedural question as far as submitting the packet. I noticed at the end that you said 4 sealed envelopes, which is a little different from what I'm used to. So basically, you know, I'm used to submitting online. You need to have those envelopes by the 2nd of May? I'm asking.
Yeah, exactly. So this comes from our procurement policy and procedures. When we read through them, we were just as surprised as you, but apparently we don't have the ability to change them. Those are sort of standard procedures for every RFP submitted to South Coast. And yeah, they need to be sealed because they'll be opened up by the reviewers of the proposals. And it's like an official process to review sort of in a closed room.
Okay, thank you, Scott. So just make sure that they're in the mail by then, I guess.
And they actually have to arrive at our
oh.
agency headquarters by 2 p.m. on the proposal due date. So not post.
Okay, excellent. Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
I had one more question. Which is, this gets into support. I'm with Aerodyne, and we've got our mobile lab, and you know I'm considering proposing that we do measurements and with the mobile lab. And in the past, we've gone to Diamond Bar and had our mobile lab basically park there when we weren't using it, and stay powered there. And perhaps we would do that. We wouldn't need to necessarily do that. We could do something else if that wasn't going to work out. But if we were going to do that, I guess that would probably fall under the realm of a support that would need to basically get approved by April 2nd. Is that right?
Yeah, I would assume so, but I'm going to let our monitoring and analysis division executives field that one. Jason or Andrea, do you want to field that?
Hi, sorry, I was on the line with the person who was calling from the main lobby, so I missed the question. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, certainly, Jason. My name's Ed Fortner. I'm with Aerodyne Research, and we have in the past staged our mobile lab from your location at Diamond Bar, and we might. And in the proposal, I'm going to propose that we, go out and do measurements with our mobile lab. We could potentially stage it in Diamond Bar. I mean, I don't think we need to if that's not going to work out, but it's something we're considering doing. If we were to do that, would you need to have, I guess, is that a support that would need to basically get approved by April 2nd? Because I know that there's we're supposed to get a letter of support basically by April 2nd to cover support.
Sure. So if I understand the question, so if you need to, for example, park a vehicle at our headquarters, so that would be something that I would collaborate with some of the people like building services who would have kind of more of that domain. But we're happy to answer that question. I believe Scott mentioned that we'll take the questions here and we can post replies out publicly. So I think we've noted that question and we'll be able to reply directly as well as online as well.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. Sounds
Great.
good.
Thank you, Ed.
Yeah, and Ed, after you hear back from us about that, and that's something you want, assuming that we could make it happen, it's something you want to happen, it'd be best to get it formalized in a letter of support. But that doesn't have to be a whole process, right? You can send us an email and say, sort of, this is what we need. We'll have already talked about it, right? in this meeting and the answers that we're going to get back to. So you make sort of that request, and then we'll follow up with a letter of support for you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Oh.
Another one, Ed?
Yeah, Scott, I don't know if you can get into this or not, and if you can't, that's fine. But I realize that the total allotted amount up to $850,000. And I realize, 3.5 year project. What I wonder, and if you can't answer it, it's fine, but I wonder if this is envisioned being split up between numerous groups, or if this is something where you you envision one group getting the whole thing. And if you can't answer that, that's okay. I'm just being blunt and straightforward and asking it.
Yeah, so our plan is to issue it all as one contract.
Okay,
So
good to know.
Yeah, so we realize that there'll probably be, a bunch of collaborators that get together and issue their proposal together. Maybe there's some subcontractors or whatnot, but we're hoping to issue all the money kind of in one complete contract.
Okay, thanks, Scott. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Yifang, do you have another question?
Yeah, I think no one else, I feel we'll give other people space to ask their questions first. But my question has to do with the modeling part. Is this RFA looking for, my understanding reading through is to look for supplement field measurements to what Mace is already committed to do a year-round sampling, and then use those measurement data to derive a better emission factors for brake and tire and road dust tire wear emissions to provide input into the model that as part of Mace exercise that the district staff will do anyway. And then maybe the field data can also provide some sort of validation to help with the 2x2 kilometer surfaces. I guess that's my understanding, correct me if I didn't read RFP wrong correctly. And then I'm just thinking for the modeling part for the bidder to propose, is the district looking for some sort of a supplement, different type of modeling, for example, land use regression or line source models to specifically looking at on-roadway emissions? Because I think, repeating what the district is doing on CMAX seems to be a little bit redundant. I guess I just want to get more insights into what will best support this effort in terms of providing either the model input for the model that the district staff will be developing, providing data to validate the model that the district staff is developing, or the district is actually looking for some sort of a supplement, different type of model output to validate the model that the district staff is developing.
Yeah, I can help to answer that question. Okay, so yeah, so ultimately we're asking for exposure estimates, which we recognize will likely require like chemical transport modeling or other type of modeling. In addition to that, our modeling group is already conducting modeling for MATE-6, and like you said, it would be sort of redundant to conduct for this study to duplicate that work. And so I think we prefer that the study does not duplicate the modeling work that we're going to conduct for MATE-6. So instead, I think it would be preferred to coordinate the work that the proposed work for this study with the modeling work that AQMD staff will conduct for MATE-6, so that to sort of better inform those brake wear and tire and road wear particle exposure estimates in the modeling. And like you said, it's not just a modeling study. We're actually looking for sort of on the ground measurements, real world measurements in the South Coast AQMD to essentially get better idea of what those exposures are. So I think there's different ways you can go about it. That may be in the sense of improving the emissions input used in modeling, which then Southwest AQMD staff could use those emissions potentially for the modeling work that's conducted for MATE 6. That would be one way. I think it's also possible to design the study in a different way. Like you said, more of like a validation. So you're measuring these, you're determining these exposures based on measurements, and maybe using that to sort of improve the modeling work that's the outputs of the modeling work in terms of breakaway particles, entire and roadway particles that is coming out of our modeling work for MATE 6. So we didn't specify exactly how that has to be done in the RFP. That's kind of up to you. So I think there are different approaches, and I think you're right. Like the ways you were describing it, or the different ways you could approach it, I think is sort of accurate and kind of how we intended the RFP.
Thank you. This is very helpful. In the RFA, there are some verbiage about the surface developed in this exercise. Hopefully will be used in future years to look at trends. So then I think if we're envisioning proposing some like more modeling exercise on land use regression or machine learning based, or even line sort of like R-line type of a model, and would that be considered? And that I guess somehow this needs to be able to be used by the district staff to improve their I guess May's standard modeling exercises moving forward, right? I think that's what my reading on the RFA. Even we propose something more cutting edge or different from the district, still want something that can help to validate the May's traditional or like state-of-art modeling exercise, which is CMAX and WRF-driven type of model, correct?
I think I can provide maybe partial answers. So I think specifically if you're approaching this in the sense of developing sort of emissions data that gets used by like CMAQ type modeling, we're asking that you provide that emissions to us directly so that we can use those emissions within our own modeling work, for MATE 6 and also to calculate trends, as you said. For other type of more like cutting edge modeling, or like I think you're mentioning like kind of hybrid modeling, incorporating R-line. Like we don't have concrete plans to do that for MATE 6 as far as I know. So for that type of work, I think it would be best to sort of, I guess, discuss like the specific type of modeling work that you have in mind with the modeling group, and to see like if our support, our resources can help with your proposed work, if they can kind of support your proposed work. And I think maybe Sang-Mi can provide more information to help answer.
Yeah, I think Yifang, you summarized it very well. So did Nico. So any method, approach, Yifang or any bidders propose, we will evaluate. And then you can utilize any cutting-edge method, whether it's land use regression or line source model or machine learning, that's okay. But then eventually, as Nico mentioned, the deliverable, we would expect a gridded format of exposure data. So it's if there is a direct estimate of emission factors or emission amount, then in CMAQ compatible format, we can utilize it directly. Or if it is exposure field, then yeah, we can also utilize it by kind of adjusting model platform and then see how to incorporate that into final the cancer risk estimates.
Thank you, Sammy. Thank you. One more question. I think if anyone have more question, I'm happy to let other people ask first. Just so that I understand, the RFA seems to be focusing on just the on-road, right? On-road brake and tire wear emission surface, exposure surfaces, right? Because we know, like as Sammy said, there's also aircrafts and other brake and tire emission sources in the basin. But in terms of the final deliverables that the district will help the district most is on-road emitted brake and tire wear exposure surface, right? Or you're really looking at just the ambient everything, including the other sources. I think somewhere I read that there is an interest to separate out those different sources from the on-road emissions. So in my mind, the final deliverable surface is an on-road emitted brake and tire wear and road wear dust exposure surface.
Yeah, so we had originally thought, oh, it'd be great to get it all. But then, in developing the RFP, we wanted to narrow the scope a little bit because it's really too much to have to bring in, aircraft and rail and everything like that. So we narrowed the scope and we're looking for just on-road in particular. But I think there is a line in the RFP that says that we want to make sure that off-road sources aren't getting confused as on-road. So you may need to be a little bit concerned with off-road sources, so that like if you measure near LAX, you may also be getting, aircraft tire emissions as well. And that could, be an interference in the measurements. So, that's the extent that we want proposers to consider off-road, just sort of like how they could interfere with on-road measurements. But we are primarily concerned about on-road and then also the resuspended material.
Thank you, very helpful.
Okay, looks like there's a Q&A question. So the question from BH back, can air quality modeling inputs be shared with the contractors like MFAC's mobile emissions? So I think maybe Sang-Mi can provide some information.
Sure, will do. So the air quality modeling input. So meaning that is the question is about emissions or you are asking the entire thing. For example, when we do modeling input, we will see exactly what the bidders are looking for. But then, the emissions can be like mobile sources specific or just it's integrated for the entire sources and then ready for CMAQ or grid model. Also, air quality modeling input could be initial condition, boundary condition, meteorology condition, etc. So we willing to collaborate with the public who get this award. But one caveat is it has to be publicly available data. So for example, the latest publicly available data is based on the 2022 Air Quality Management Plan released in December 2022. Since we are working on the MATE 6, there can be a little bit of leeway to kind of work more newer data. So that part we have to see. But the short answer is to the extent, yes.
Were there any more questions? Okay, so we took down the names of the attendees. So attending one of these bidders conference is mandatory to submit a proposal. So we took down the names of the attendees, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody's name, their Zoom name is the same as their real name, because we want to be able to give you credit for attending the meeting. So if you could just let me know if your Zoom name is different, even if you don't want to reveal your real name and you want to send me an email later or Nico an email later, that would be great. Okay, well, thanks everyone. So we scheduled this to go until 3 o'clock. So we're going to, all the staff will hang out on the meeting, probably, but go dark. So if you think of any other questions, feel free, and we'll be around till 3 o'clock. And thanks a lot for coming. I hope this was helpful for you all.
Yeah. Thanks. It was very helpful for me. That's all I've got, and it's a little later out here, so I'm going to take off, but I appreciate it.
Great. Great. Have a good night.
Well, thank you. Well, since no one is asking question, I have a few more clarification questions, if I may.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we'll stay on.
Just so that I understand, so the surface that you guys are looking for is the delta surface or is the ambient PM10 surface from brake and tire? Because I'm thinking if you're looking just for the emission, because we have some sort of background information, right? Background PM10 in the basin. Is the district looking for the delta PM10 exposure surface just from the brake and tire on road, or you're looking for an annual, because that's hard to link it to annual cancer risk, right? Because all the cancer risk, anything is it's just the exposure, right? It's everything that people get inhaled. I guess I'm just trying to think about what will be the most helpful, right? Because if you're doing annual PM10 surface due to brake and tire, then you take out the background level, right? Versus if you're saying, oh, this is just the PM10 surface, but maybe a certain percentage is from brake and tire. I guess I'm just getting some, be nice to have some clarification on this.
Nico, do you want to field that one? Do you want me to?
Yeah, I don't 100% understand, I think. So delta PM10 is in your explanation is like the PM10 due to on-road sources that's also emitted, that's coming from brake wear particle emissions or tire and road wear
Right.
emissions,
Right.
right?
Because because our in the South Coast Basin, the background PM10 concentration also have variations, right? So so then whether we're looking for a delta PM10 from brake and tire on-road emissions, or we're looking for just the ambient PM10 concentration.
I see.
Because it's background PM10, right? And it's also have a surface. Like you say, you remove all the freeways and roadways, you're gonna still have a PM10 surface, right? So are we looking for that surface and then add the brake and tire and get the delta out of it?
I see.
But then calculate the cancer risk, you need the total exposure surface to do that.
This is a good question. Yeah, I think we may have to come back to you on that one. Unless Scott, you have a good answer for this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't want to double count brake and tire wear, right? We do a pretty good job of getting the PM10 surface currently. We just can't separate out what comes from brake and tire wear. So ideally, we'd be able to say, of the total risk, or of the total PM10 mass, this much is coming from brake, tire, and road wear. And then of the total risk, this percentage of the risk, I know there's a huge uncertainty on that, but this percentage of the risk is coming from brake, tire wear, and road wear. So that's kind of our ultimate goal. But I think, yeah, the issue is if you calculate the delta, well, we're going to have overall PM10, right? So if you calculate the delta, we should be able to back out the PM10 that comes from non-brake wear and tire wear.
Yeah. Yeah, in my mind, I think what would be really helpful, because the district is doing the CMAX model anyway, right? And that gives your surface, right? Total PM10 film, just the ambient PM10 surface with all sources, right? Including those like interfering sources. And so then if we get better emission factors and near major roadways and intersections where the brake and tire could be high, and then we can get a better emission to really do a like roadway focused maybe model exercise, and then you can use that to somehow subtract from the total surface. One way to the other to compare that will give better information, I would think, for the near roadway or for the road on road brake and tire and road wear PM10s exposure surface.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's no, they're not very reactive, right? They're mainly just not semi-volatile or anything. They're like just dispersion is, I guess, the main mechanisms to change their concentrations near roadways.
Yeah, Nico, did you have any other thoughts, or do you think we should still get back to Yifang?
Yeah, well, I guess, yeah, I guess so. My understanding was, so delta is referring to sort of like AQMD background versus, what you might see next to a road, right? So that's like the delta, right? So like, are we I think the question, or maybe I'm misunderstanding, is like, are we interested in like on-road or roadway generated brake and tire wear particles coming from outside of AQMD, right? Or is that a different question?
Oh, I see what you mean. So Yifang, were you asking also about like brake and tire wear particles coming from outside our jurisdiction, sort of like background levels, or you were talking about brake and tire wear versus non-brake and tire wear?
Yeah, I more the brake and tire wear versus non-brake and tire wear. Well, yeah, I don't think they travel that far based on my knowledge at this point. Yeah, I think there's pretty local source, given they're in the coarse mode. Yeah, I'm more just thinking about at the end of the day, the surface that the contractor produce, what is really entail, right? Is it like a roadway network driven brake and tire and road wear emission surface, or it's just it's that and with all the I think that's what probably complement what Maze is doing anyway better, because the Maze is modeling everything right in the air, the total ambient. So having that can allow to do a lot more interesting things to try to tease apart the relative risk just from the roadway emissions on the brake and tire and road wear, right? And then versus that.
So
Yeah.
I mean, the MATES does estimate the exposure from the sources, from different types of all the sources within the basin. But we also, I think the beauty of modeling is you can tease out different sources. And then the emissions for this specific subject is very uncertain. So if this project leads to refine the emission factors, then we will be happy to take it and then test it out, right? So I'm not sure whether measurement would be able to separate out the tire brake wear portion and resuspended portion from all the impact of the other sources, but still, that's the modeling capability that we can utilize here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's another, of course, I mean, there are different ways to do that, but when you do ambient measurements, you measure mixture, right? You can design a sampling size to extract the roadway signals better, right? Looking at meteorology and strategically setting size or there are methodologies that you can apply to do that. So yeah, and then at the end of the day, I think it's just it's still will be very challenging to tease just the brake and tire and roll out of tailpipe and out of background from ambient measurements. We're gonna still be seeing lots of like big uncertainties, and everyone knows like right, roadway and traffic, they're very dynamic. Yeah.
Jia Chen, do you have another question? Oh, dropped off. Okay. Oh, back again. Jia Chen, did you have another question? Let's see.
Oh, thank you so much. I couldn't figure out how to unmute myself. Thank you for
I think we
unmuting
have
me.
it for you. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so just want to confirm with Sami. So it sounds like we can provide a spatially resolved emissions inventory for tire and brake-wear that could be helpful for the modeling effort of CMAQ. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely, right. So
Mhm.
I'm looking at Nico and Scott as well, but that is one of the deliverables.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks. And would you also be interested in like co-publishing a peer review paper in addition to the MATES report eventually after the project?
I think that's eventually up to our senior management, but then we are doing it with Mates 5, so
Mhm.
technically I don't see why it wouldn't be.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay, sounds good. So we're gonna probably go dark, but if you think of anything else, we'll be here till 3 o'clock. And have a good one.